Hey guys, Volcano the Bat here, aka Juracycler. So here we are, Project 06's episode Shadow release, or Demo 4 if you will. And wow, there's a lot to go over. Probably more so than the last review, which given the content is to be expected. But there are changes even to Sonic's campaign which I definitely will be going over. If you want, feel free to skip to this timestamp if you want Shadow talk. But with that, let's jump right in to Project 06's episode Shadow release. Right off the bat, before even the title screen boots up, we get our first Blur Studio pre-rendered opening cutscene in Project 06. Somewhat unexpected, but a welcome change. If anything, I'm surprised that this didn't replace the trailer if you leave it idle in the title screen, especially since if you do this in the final build, it does actually play the opening cutscene for Sonic's story. Dope we got to see not just Shadow's opening cutscene, but even the subtitles 06 had on by default. I'll go more into what I would like to eventually see here when I cover the menu. The title screen pretty much is the same. Thankfully, if you really want to go back to the classic 06 look, we do now have the option to select the original retail title screen, which also disables a video playing in the main menu, which again brings it back to that classic retail look, be it for variety or for the hardcore 06 fans. If you've already seen my Pier 6 review from last year, almost everything I pointed out regarding the title screen still stands, still hoping for new game, continue. In fact, if I'm pushing it, I'd even have the quit in the title screen over the main menu, but I am very glad that this is present regardless. I don't know what it is, it just seems that with more text it just looks a bit more complete. In my opinion, press start button over press start is definitely an improvement, so yet again I'm quite grateful for this minor change. Before I talk about the main menu, there's something about the text animation. It looks different. Yeah, from memory, Retails has a distortion, which oddly enough is in Project 06, but it only occurs when you actually trigger it to get in, compared to when you aren't pressing it and it just kind of glurs. Not sure if this was a mistake, but just in case it wasn't, it doesn't hurt pointing it out. Moving on to the main menu, not a whole lot has changed. In extras, for the game room, TGS Sonic, camera type, homing reticle, spin effect, gem shoes type, upgrade models, E3 and X-Blah music, and the test stage are all the same, with of course the exception of the spin effect implementing the adventure spin dash sound, and the test stage having the new additions. However, Jump Dash type now has the selection to switch to Legacy, which pays tribute to Heroes and Shadow the Hedgehog's Jump Dash. Interesting, Legacy has momentum while the other two not so much. I mean, both tried to have momentum in its own crafty, value-specific way. You could say that these two not having momentum is more accurate to the original if you take away the set speed value after a jump dash ends. But because the original did have a set speed value, like I said, the original kinda did try to have momentum in its own flawed way. And because of which, I'm not really sure how I feel about these two jump dash types. I would prefer having the straight jump dash, but the thing is, I get more speed out of the curved jump dash compared to the straight. And because, like I said, the original tried to have momentum, meanwhile Pier 6 tries not to emulate the original, it has this kind of weird effect where it does emulate it without having momentum, but still doesn't quite feel like the original. Not yet, at least. I think the reason I prefer the curved jump dash is because it does have a good speed when you exit it if you quickly do jump dashes into the ground, which so far comparing it to the straight jump dash, in my opinion, feels more accurate. Meanwhile, for the straight jump dash, since most of the time you're not going into the ground, it doesn't seem to have the same speed value you would have when you exit the jump dash and enter the air state. But anyway, back onto the new selections we got in the game room. We now have the new option for the attack reticles, and this is basically for Shadow and Omega's lock-on. TGS Sonic, like I said, is the same, but I am a little surprised about that, mainly given Project TGS. This beautiful project was achieved in less than a week, and in it, Chaos accurately recreated Sonic's souls, Sonic's jump dash particle, and even the dash panels and springs. Now I know, having TGS Sonic selected to not just affect the animations, but all these other specifics that I just mentioned, could be considered a bit too much, but I genuinely believe that at the least, the jump dash particle and the souls are necessary to apply to TGS Sonic, if selected. What these two specifics have in common is they all affect Sonic, so I definitely would love to see this get an upgrade in a future release. But even for the Project TGS springs and dash panels, we do already have some elements from the tech demo present here. The reinforced wooden crates are in Pier 6, the rings have visually been tweaked a lot to mimic that of the tech demo's rings. We've got a camera selection to switch to the TGS camera. Heck, if you want to talk terrain, we have literally got the bridge. And if these common objects from Project TGS were added on either to TGS Sonic, or had their their own selection? As I've said in the past, doing this type of thing could really give us the best of both worlds. The difficult part has been achieved. It already has been recreated, and flawlessly, I might also add. So all that really needs to be done is implementing it here, and adding it to either TGS Sonic or giving its own selection. For the UI customization, we now have enemy health, which I was a bit surprised to see. I really wasn't expecting it. Like, yes, I did point it out, but I thought for sure that there was more chance of the trick messages having a selection to hide them to be more faithful to the E3 demo than the enemy health being removed. Which means, all we really need now, at least in terms of gameplay, is the trick logo messages to have a selection to disable them. Doing so would really complete the E3 UI. Especially now. We also now have the option to view who was involved with PR6 in the credits. It was a bit unfortunate some wouldn't know who was involved outside of Chaos due to not playing the full demo to view the credits that way. At least now more people are gonna see who exactly was involved. There certainly was the occasional "who are you" comment. So yeah, recognition now. I do appreciate it. We now have the audio room implemented, which I was thinking of maybe talking about in either the last review or this review if it weren't to be implemented, but here we are. And it makes sense. We've got all the main stages, so yeah, it makes sense that we have all the main music. I'm actually really hoping in the future we get to see the Dreams of an Absolution remix implemented.
Every night I will save your life, and every night I will be with you.
Actually, you know what, now thinking about it, there really is a lot of remixes that have been done by Lee Brotherton.
In the nightlight, do you see what you dream? Though your troubles are they are what they seem. Look around you, then you may realize all the creatures are with their lives.
So, I'm not really sure if it could be considered necessary, but, you know, at the same time, it is remixes by the vocalist, and admittedly, some of the remixes are actually pretty badass sounding, and you know, there is actually one that I even prefer over the original. So yeah, I don't know about you guys, but I'd love to hear this in the audio room for a silver release. I'm actually a bit surprised that we didn't get access to the theater room. But even with that said, even if we didn't get access to the proof of concept cutscene take on Too Late, at the least we probably could have gotten access to the video file cutscenes, or in other words, the pre-rendered Obla Studio cutscenes, especially now since there is a pre-rendered cutscene in PR6. I guess it'll turn up there eventually, so all good. And at least we got the audio room, so yeah, all good. If you guys don't know already, the audio room was actually planned to be a lot bigger. It was planning to have music from previous Sonic games, which for right now definitely doesn't need to be implemented, definitely can be considered unnecessary, especially if it isn't going to be like Generations where you can use these tracks while you're playing a stage. But if Chaos for whatever reason does want to tackle this one day, I think more so this could be done for a future release rather anytime soon. So like, we're talking releases where the hub worlds are a thing, since it was at the store where you would be able to purchase all the different games music, which for now in concept is a good substitute for purchasing gems, and who knows, maybe even the main abilities if Chaos wants to go full adventure. Taking a look back at the game room, in regards to the UI customization, pretty much everything I said from the previous review still stands here as well. Still hoping for more customizations. Like, these three could be considered the same build, just to how consistent the HUD is, even if there are inconsistencies within review builds, TGS06 builds, and the Xbox Live Arcade demo build. Stuff that, again, I feel can be adjusted with a UI customization. Once again, because of how similar they all are to what we already have in PR6. Since we got a copy of the E3 demo's loading screen to work with the Xbox Live Arcade demo, Chaos went ahead and recreated the little details that were missing. And yeah, gotta say, it looks a lot more complete now. Not gonna lie, I am a bit disappointed that we are forced to have a red Sonic Life icon for the E3 HUD. Like, let's look back at Silver in the E3 demo. Do we see a silver Sonic Life icon? Oh wow, look at that, we don't. I even made a poll about this just to get some outside thoughts and opinions for A, what people would prefer, and if anybody would open the suggestion of having both, having it as an option. And look at that, you guys actually wanted an option as much as I do! To me, this is the exact same issue I had with the Demo 1 and 2 E3 Life icons for everyone that wasn't Sonic. Because not only is it inconsistent and inaccurate to how the E3 demo would have used this icon for everyone, but yet again, we don't even have the choice to switch between the Sonic icon and everyone else. Or in our case, different colored Sonic icons. And I was was just done praising how good the last release was to being more faithful to the E3 Demo's life icons. I really wouldn't give a stuff if the multicolored Sonic icons, the character renders, or these other icons are on the E3 HUD, as long as we have the choice of being more faithful to how the original covered this. But again, we're being forced to use stuff that is inaccurate, because with this logic, the silver release will use a silver Sonic Life icon, rather than what we actually see in the E3 demo. I would even say the same about the main display if we were forced to have the E3 HUD and not have an option to switch to the retail HUD. And that was the case for some super early versions of Pier 6. But we have that option now. So why can't we have the option here? Heck, I could almost say the same about the mission completed. It could potentially get its own option to be disabled in the same way the in-game cutscenes have the option to disable them. Dope that it's font specific depending on if you're on retail or E3, but definitely not faithful to retail. And even more, this could even apply to the trick messages. Because while I do prefer the mission completed text and the TGS06 gradient over no gradient, likewise the gradient we received in retail, or not having a mission completed animation sequence, also like retail, I could definitely see a lot of people out there going, hey, the results screen doesn't immediately pop up after getting the gold ring anymore, and instead shows this message that it was supposed to. Or hey, the retail HUD is inaccurate, the gradient's not the same as that boring yellow looking gradient. And because we do have this gradient instead, it opens the possibility of eventually getting the TGS06, the Xbox Live Arcade, and the review build differences. Because again, all three builds that I mentioned do have a similar enough setup to consider adding this to Pier 6's UI customization eventually. I'm confident Chaos could achieve this if he wanted to. It's just as always a very minor specific. The Shadow main display gradient I'm okay with being different because, fun fact if you guys didn't know, Shadow and Silver were meant to have their own custom gradients. And if you look carefully at the E3 Demo's HUD, Silver's gradient is different to Sonic's. And, of course, like everything, this is in the retail build, unused. From what I've seen, I'm pretty satisfied with how he's covered Silver's gradient. It does look like the E3 demo. For Shadow's gradient, this gradient went through quite an evolution, albeit it only went through 3 changes, but it was the process of getting to the current and final gradient that really intrigues me. My initial reaction from the very first gradient for Shadow was very mixed, mainly because I get that back then, since we didn't have access to viewing Shadow's gradient in the original game in, well, gameplay, and instead recreating this transparent gradient could only be done by viewing it with a black background. Yeah, I could understand why it wasn't considered at this point. But then we get this second look of Shadow's gradient. Definitely a lot better, but I definitely still had my critiques on it. And it was at this point when we got the patch to view Shadow's gradient in gameplay in the original. And what was Chaos's reaction to this? Come at me! So at this point, I kinda lost hope of there being any chance of it being faithful to the real deal. And I genuinely don't know what happened, but here we are. The third gradient is pretty much identical to the real deal. I really don't know what to say. I am super grateful that this has been done, but I really have no idea what made Chaos change his mind, but I'll take it. And I really don't have any critiques anymore. That's as faithful as it's ever gonna get. But let's talk about the gauge. While I'm glad that there is a balance between yellow and red for Shadow's gameplay, the meter I'm a bit on the fence with because, again, it's a good way to balance the yellows and the reds, and I definitely prefer having red particle action for gameplay and a yellow meter, rather yellow particles and a red meter. But that's just me. And comparing it to Silver's meter, yes, Silver's does look different to how everyone's looks in the final. So based on that, yeah, it does seem like the gradients and the gauge meter were going to be dependent on the character or campaign that you're playing. I guess my only main critique right now, aside from not having an option to go back to being faithful to the final and disabling Shadow and eventually Silver's gradient, is simply the fact that, again, to be more faithful to how the E3 demo would have made the HUD look, with the main display having a different gradient, really look at the E3 HUD with all the footage that we have received, look at the pause, and look at the results. This all comes back down to having options to switch between being more faithful to the E3 demo or switching to this. instead of being forced to have it. Like at this rate, we could get the main menu to the E3 loading screens to look like a Sonic 1 ROM hack by having character gradients. This is just getting ridiculous. And make no mistake, I'm open to ideas like this. But again, as long as we've got the option to go back to being more faithful. Official remake or unofficial remake, we should respect what the original did. And I definitely feel that elements should still stick to using the blue elements. Like, the text in my opinion should stay blue, especially since the rank text was unedited. Even the arrows in both the retail and E3 pulls, you know, to really give it that Sonic feel, because at the end of the day, this game still is called Sonic the Hedgehog. And before I move on, while I'm talking about the E3 pulls, compare it to the E3 footage. It would be neat if in the future we could potentially get the 1p to 4p pause text, depending on what player your controller is set to. Heck, I'm surprised to not see the Xbox Live Arcade loading screen selectable. Sure, a quick Photoshop edit would be necessary for the updated input maps, but even outside the UI customization, it especially could have been used as you entered the Demers take on Kingdom Valley. Just a real bummer we don't have the PS3 TGSR6 loading screen to really be specific to which inputs you might have selected. But in conclusion to this really can all just be wrapped up as adding all of this that I've pointed out as options to the UI customization. Surprisingly enough, there actually are people out there that don't actually want the mission completed text. Again, stuff like this. Having a visual to the UI customization showing the mission completed text so you can switch between either the PS6's retail font, the E3 font, and an option to be more faithful to retail by having no mission completed text. We cater to everyone. Rant over, please add options, let's move on. Now, let's talk about game settings and options. I pretty much said everything I needed to about BG Video. However, Crisis City, Flamecore, Tropical Jungle, and Kingdom Valley now have a new title screen video, in respect to both stages having new sections for this release, or visual changes to existing sections, or a recreation to an original demo. And it makes sense, I am glad that we have received these. I definitely do prefer this Crisis City title screen over the last one, but that's just me. Aside from that, invert camera, in-game dialogue, hint rings, voiceover language, character sway, camera leaning, and jiggle burns are all the same. However, we now have invert glider, which surprisingly, I didn't realize how much I wanted this. We also got in-game cutscenes, which I don't know if people complained, but I really wasn't expecting this. I mean, maybe speedrunners for the sake of just wanting to jump into the action. But man, I respect that. I respect that a lot. To put that much effort into more than one in-game cutscene, and then to add an option so people don't need to view it. Yeah, seriously, respect right there. Going back to what's changed. Finally, button icons. Been hanging out for this one for a while. I don't know, I guess since I've played the 360 version more than the PS3 version, and since PlayStation was the first console I went into before the Xbox, I don't mind every once in a while switching to them. Can I also just point out that Chaos manually and specifically recreated the element of the PS3 menu having the background gradient flipped upside down to be more faithful to how the PS3 menu looks. This is something I actually remember noticing on my first, I don't want to say playthrough because I didn't actually play the game fully, but the first time I launched it, this would have been 2011. 10 woofed years ago. And I remember too, I was like, hey, that doesn't look right. That looks different. That's different. I know that's different. I've played enough of the 360 version to know that is different. That is different. And for the longest time, I didn't think anyone else would have noticed something so minor. And if they did, if anything, would have assumed it was just their output or even the capture card making it look different. I never, ever would have imagined that if PS6 was going to have PS3 optional settings to switch between 360 to PS3, would the gradient be recreated? And here we are, being able to swap between the 360 to PS3 gradient. Makes me wonder if he's going to make the health bars be upside down, in the same way that PS3's health bars are upside down compared to the 360 builds. Whether this was intentional on the PS3 version or not is, well, it's equivocal if anything. Regardless, I'm very, very satisfied with what he's done here. Looks freaking amazing, and I do feel like I'm playing a PS3 version of the menu. As I briefly pointed out, because button icons are now a thing, and you know what, if I'm getting really picky here, because Chaos recreated the E3 Demo's title screen video, perhaps sometime in the future we could get access to the E3 Demo's title screen sprites, depending on the main display that you've set in the UI customization, which should technically include the game's logo as well, because if you look very carefully, the E3 Demo's logo actually uses the logo we received from not just the trailers, but the official soundtrack and the sites. Compare it to the one we got in retail, it is in fact different. This could not only affect the title screen to look more closer to E3, but even the unofficially seen Xbox Live Arcade loading screen with the E3 style using the retail font. In other words, if you have the loading screen set to E3, meanwhile the main display is set to retail, instead of having the E3 font for the stage logo with the bigger, more bolder objective text, you'd instead have what would have been used for the Xbox Live Arcade loading screen. The best part is, the Xbox Live Arcade files the E3 stage logo in the retail font has all the stage's logos, including End of the World. I mentioned this previously, but depending on what you're using for button icons, it could potentially view what we actually got in the Xbox Live Arcade demo, or the TGS06 loading screen for PS3, albeit the latter would be a recreation. But then the E3 loading screen is also a recreation, a mighty fine one at that. Heck, speaking of fonts, this could even affect the subtitles eventually. You ever notice that in some of the trailers, the subtitles were kinda bigger? Not to mention the same font that's used for a lot of E3 text? I low-key do wonder what the E3 font subtitles that were in place would have looked for other cutscenes outside of what we have already seen. You know what, even what we have already seen. You ever notice that there were also script inaccuracies here? The City of Water, Soliana. That are the key to this secret. Ah, the Chaos Emerald. I finally found it. Make no mistake, I get that it's more than likely just a translation issue, something that was very obviously apparent in the E3 demo, so much so that they even got inputs wrong to the opposite console. But my point to this is, because at one point we were meant to have this style of subtitles, and we not only didn't get it in the final, but we also haven't seen this style with an accurate script to what we got in the final. I mean, damn, it's almost like it's daring us to put it back in. And at the time of this video, this currently is the only way of getting it to work. And faithfully. So seeing all these alongside the recreated E3 title screen video and potentially its logo and sprites that it came with, from both the Copyright Sega Corporation 2006 to the Cairo font press start, and who knows, given Chaos has shown an interest in doing this, maybe in the future we could even see the E3 demo's menu. I'm not really sure how that would look with a setup that would include shatter, especially trying to merge this with what we do already have from the retail main menu. Likewise, what we would have received with the new game and continue text that would have appeared in the retail title screen. Yeah, there definitely is a lot to go over if we're even going to consider the E3 menu, but that's a story for another time. Going back to options, we now have data settings, which is pretty cool, I've got to admit. Keeping track of your total playtime, likewise your last save, but perhaps more importantly, having the capability of being able to reset your game data. Now this kind of goes back to why I wanted the new game selection to appear in the title screen. It could be really useful for speedrunners that want to reset their game save, instead of having to close out of the game, carefully locate a specific file and delete it, compared to being able to do it safely and in the game. I think when we get to the story mode elements, there'll be more reason to have a new game selection in the title screen then, compared to now. Because in the meantime, we've got this, and I'm perfectly fine with that. Only thing I'll comment on is the total playtime. If possible, I think it would be really cool if we could have a separate time for the in-game time, basically keeping track of your time when you're in gameplay, compared to this time and just keeping track of, well, everything. A nitpick of mine that I've had with the main menu for a while now is how it doesn't include the Xbox Live or Network selection. Now, I understand, because it's on PC, why would there be a selection titled Xbox Live? Or better yet, why would he even implement something that wouldn't be selected for God knows how long? For one thing, we have PS3 and 360 selections for the inputs, to the point that even the hints still say press the A button to do a homing attack, or press the X button to do a homing attack, depending on which console you've selected the inputs for. And in terms of implementing something that won't be selected for a while, I look at the multiplayer and just go, well, how about that? Why is that even implemented if that's, again, not going to be selected for God knows how long? And aside from being more faithful to how the original was intended to look, I feel like now that we do have the option for PlayStation and Xbox icons, there's even more reason for switching button icons to affect Xbox Live to Network and vice versa. Again, like multiplayer, even if it's not selectable, it would just complete the menu that much more. And the main reason I was hesitant to point this out in the previous review was the simple fact that we didn't have the PS3 icons previously. But now that we do, again, we could really see how this menu was supposed to look on both the PS3 and 360 side of things if implemented. You can probably see why I cut this out at the previous review. And even now, I probably wouldn't be talking about this if the PS3 and 360 button icons weren't a thing. And even if this doesn't get done, at least I feel the satisfaction of putting the idea out there in case some miracle happens in the future. And some of you might be thinking, well, what would it actually do when and if it eventually gets selectable. And well, it really depends on what Chaos wants to do in the future. It could serve as something as small as installing the DLC to PR6, to something as big as having online multiplayer. Again, it really depends on what Chaos wants to do in the future. Before I move on, we've received a lot of info in the last year regarding previous menus of 06, be they for a demo or not. And again, it's cool to see that Chaos has actually shown an interest in recreating and implementing this to Unity. Whether that means implementing it to PR6 though, that's another thing. Assuming that that is the case though, I would really love for all of you guys to discuss in the comments how all of these menus could look if they were merged together in the form of PR6. Anyway, the final thing to talk about on menu changes is we now have the status screen to keep track of all your PBs. If you directly compare it to the original, you can actually see the best time and best score have been swapped around, mainly to be faithful to the results screen. And fair enough too. I also see Chaos thought among the same lines to correct the upper and lowercase spelling. Like, the inconsistency in the original is interesting to say at the least, especially comparing it to the modded in menu in the demo. We now have a new addition in the form of best total score. This was yet another element where I was really surprised how much I wanted this. I look forward to the release where medals are finally making their debut. Before I move on from the menu talk, this has been bugging me for some time now. When you save changes in options, you have a pretty cool animation where it says, the game is now saved. But, you guys know how memeable now loading ... is. So I've always wondered, could we maybe get could we just get a 1 arrow stroke saying now saving ... or something along those lines? Cause damn, now loading, now saving, I don't know, that's just a me thing if I were to have a wish list. Anyway, moving on to the stages. Sonic Wave version. As usual, I'm still a bit about the custom animation replacing the full animation for the pole launch, as well as the air rings. I think it's because it's basically creating a new object rather trying to take on board something that is in the game and adding to it. But honestly, what's wrong with just having him run across the water? It's a bit more believable than him just kind of skidding over it. And I've always had a bit of an issue with the start of Wave version, how you have such a rush of speed but then all of a sudden just lose it. Again, another rare time where Sonic Next seems, in my opinion, to be more superior here, especially since he does it in other games, even in the classics. Hell, even other projects like the STH 2006 project. Which actually brings me to a very interesting point that I had before Demo 1 even went out. I've always wanted to be able to surf to the shore, instead of just missing the supposed target and then that all of a sudden registers as a death. Of course, running to the shore compared to surfing to the shore might be a bit more believable, but then that's my point. What's wrong with having him run across the water? It would also be a reason to speed it up, compared to the current take on it. And while I'm still on topic to this, why can't I surf into this little part to the right? I don't know, steering just does not seem to work for this. I mean, yeah, sure, it's minor, you just have to jump and then you're there. But I really am surprised you can't do something as basic as steering into it. Also, big surprise, I found even more camera changes in review builds. At this point, I'm not really expecting all of these to be implemented to PR6, but if they are, probably more chance of it being done for something like hard or very hard. If we get custom placement for easy, super hard, or ultimate, perhaps there. I definitely could see one of the alternate Kingdom Valley routes being implemented to something again for either easy, super hard, or ultimate. Perhaps this is where the waves could be brought in, for the surfing difficulty. Because like I said in the previous review, for a stage-titled wave version, there is a pretty big lack of waves. Surfing aside, let's talk about underwater gameplay. If lava chips away at rings but water insta-kills you, especially when adventure games had underwater mechanics, not to mention classics, as interesting as it would be to see a Kingdom Valley or the hubs getting this underwater treatment, the difference between that and this is that this could actually work. It does have terrain already modeled to show what's underneath the water. Even Dusty Desert and Aquatic Base, while small, do have terrain modeled underneath the water. But at this point it really is up to Chaos if he wants to implement and add underwater level design. My biggest complaint with Wave version in the past has been jump panels. Specifically this one and this one. And looking at other people's playthroughs, it doesn't look like I'm alone.
That ramp launch is a little slow.
Yeah.
Now?
Let's fucking go! Why can't the whole game be like that from the get-go? Why do we have to request for this? Can't this be like this from the get-go, please?
Going more towards the end of section 1. Oh man. I know, Brian, you did this with his project, but... For one, I have yet to play that. I could only really see it from the videos. And two, Gen's modding has made the physics a lot more like an adventure game than I was ever expecting from mods. But at the end of the day, Gen's was made with the intent to play like a boost game from the get-go, while 06 and PR6 both set out to play like an adventure game. Boost games, despite the time their games were released compared to adventure games, don't have dedicated loading screens to split up the gameplay action that adventure games do like with 06. And despite the time of 06's release, and as an adventure game, it's common for there to be loading screens to split up the action, but that is no excuse to not show where you're gonna end up in the next section. But man, this is all I've ever wanted for Waversion, a better transition to see where the hell you're going next. I really didn't think that this would be something that would change, at least not in the next release, because I am still in awe about this. Seriously, could it actually get any more satisfying than this? I mean, you could have sections merged, but if I recall correctly, it's actually a physical impossibility for PR6 right now. And Chaos was actually planning to have Waversion be nighttime to be consistent to the opening cutscene, which I'm completely down with. If anything, I'm just concerned about, for one, the setting Silver's tropical jungle and Blaze's Waversion are going to be. Since it should technically be before the opening cutscene, we're talking sometime at night. Hell, you could get away with reusing the same night Waversion setting for Blaze's Waversion, or even Silver's tropical jungle. For two, one of the NPCs, because there is one or two that suggest that he did legitimately wait until morning, which for that reason has always made me think that at one point they planned on having a bit of a mini stage or a test stage at the start of Sonic's campaign, in the same way that Silver and Shadow's campaigns start with you already in a stage, rather a hub world. Yeah, I feel like they were going to do something somewhat similar to Sonic, where you would be controlling Sonic with a leash, destroying a few egg gunners here and there, trying to get away from both the egg carrier and the Eggman build. And this would be a basic way to get you used to the game's controls before you actually start where you normally would. And of course, concluding this mini-stage would result in viewing the first in-game cutscene that we see. This way we get progression. We have a little mini-stage before getting you into the main action, something that could potentially be a substitute for Mission 1. Heck, who knows, it could even lead to a mini-boss with the Eggman build, in respect to Silver and Shadow's story starting with a boss after you complete the first stage. And assuming we keep the concept of finding abilities rather purchasing them, forcing you to do a town mission to get rings in order to get your ability to get to the stage. Instead, we could potentially have either Sonic finding the light chip, enabling him to do the light dash, and or having good old Tails being a sweetheart by helping us cross the sea. And Chaos has actually confirmed interest in doing this, having a mini-stage at the start of Sonic's story to not only stay consistent to how Silver and Shadow's campaigns start, but as mentioned, to also stay consistent from the opening cutscene to Waversion, keeping the same setting. But back onto gameplay talk. I wanted to talk about this in the last review, but I just, well, you guys know, it was that long. And I guess to be fair, I did point it out in side notes. But I am greatly disappointed that the unused jump boards have been removed. I really do feel that this should return because it was a really good way to specify what was going to take you to a chain jump. In the same way in Unleashed, it was a good way to identify when you would be approaching a QTE. I believe the reasoning to why this was swapped out was because the jump panel that is currently being used is a different jump panel to the ones that are commonly used. Yeah, I believe these are a little tilted differently. But honestly, I don't really see what the problem is with having just the Mark Speed section common jump panels being replaced with the unused jump panels. And as mentioned, having the jump boards used for the jump panels that would send you to a chain jump. This way we get the best of both worlds. We make use of all these obstacles. And at least this way there'll be a bit more significance to bringing it back, and to why it should even be there in the first place. More and more people are playing PR6 before going into the original. Yeah, sure, you could definitely put a hint saying JUMP, but it does not excuse this Java clip.
Autocorrect type thing. Like, I'm not pressing anything right now, it's just taking me. Oh! Okay.
And I already mentioned how, in my opinion, I would move that line so it's a little bit earlier. But more on topic to the Mark Speed chain jumps. By having something more unique, rather something that is practically identical to what is used in the final, okay, tilted a wee bit different, will make a huge difference on clarifying that, oh hey, this is gonna send me to a chain jump. I need to jump. Compared to, is this gonna send, I don't, oh, too late, I'm dead. Really do hope to see this return one day. When you switch to Tails, for that matter, if you switch to any Amiga, in the original it was supposed to behave like a save point, so I believe it would be absolutely grand to have this take effect. However, for this to take effect, precautions are going to have to be made, so if you die as Tails in this part of the stage, Sonic will still have to be on the whale upon respawning still as Tails. Because not gonna lie, it's a bit of a far distance from the final section 1 save point to the end section trigger for the very first action stage of the game. And as I said before, more and more people are starting to play this before going into the original, so it'd be nice to cater to newcomers. An idea I wanted to throw out there in regards to this line
Tails, hurry up!
I was thinking maybe it could trigger when Sonic gets to this point in the stage on the Orca instead of when Tails gets to this part of the stage. Yeah, I feel this way it won't just trigger regardless if you get there super fast or super slow depending on where Tails is in the stage, but instead it'll trigger only when Sonic gets to that point in the stage. That way, basically, it's a timed line, rather something that currently triggers even if you're going as fast as possible. Anyway, getting to the end and beating the stage and viewing the E3 mission completed, let's go! Even if you stick to the retail HUD, seeing it with the new Rodent font is just an amazing visual by itself. We've already got confirmation that retail was in fact meant to use the mission completed. And looking at how the Cairo font inevitably was replaced with the new Rodent font for a lot of logos in this game, there's no doubt in my mind that if the mission completed were implemented to a retail-like build, it would have used this font. I mean, the exact same thing happened with the E3 loading screen. We've never officially seen footage of this, but just knowing the Xbox Live Arcade demo was planning to use the E3 loading screens, and instead of using the Cairo font for the stage logo, it instead would have used the new Rodent font. Again, there's no doubt in my mind that the E3 mission completed text in a retail-like build would have used the new Rodent font. In conclusion, I am very, very satisfied with Wayversion's changes. There are definitely still nitpicks I have, but honestly, this one positive just makes my day. Sonic Dusty Desert. Well, my biggest critique is still the jump panels being faster. Like, I'll give props. These sets of jump panels have been improved tremendously, and I greatly appreciate that. But I kid you not, I don't want to take this route anymore because of how slow these jump panels are. And, well, if I do, I literally will just go around them. Aside from that, the only other thing I'll note is I feel the sound design could probably be adjusted a little bit with destroying this specific object. I mean, I understand having RNG take over with the pitch, but I think this is just one sound where it should just consistently make the same pitch. If not, then perhaps get a secondary sound. So a little something I mentioned in the last review was how if you use the jump dash on this item box, specifically with the curved jump dash, it could quite easily lead to a death. Now this is no longer an issue. So yeah, thank you. Now it's at this point where I have to address the elephant in the room. That being the character's positioning during the mission completed sequence. I didn't mention this during Wayversion because, well, Wayversion, it's not an issue. But from now on, for pretty much most stages, it's just, you can tell when they made the camera angle and character positionings in the final that it was during the times that they didn't have the mission completed used, at least for the action stages, which is kind of a shame because it means either the camera's going to need to change or the characters are going to have to get a little closer to the camera. Either way, it sucks to think that it's going to steer away from the final's take on it, but a price to pay to have something like this implemented. It certainly is starting to make sense now why so many of the town missions' mission completed positionings are right up in the camera's face. I do look forward to the day that we get to see the never officially seen town mission completed text used for town missions. A long wait away, but I'm sure it'll be worth it. But honestly, that's pretty much all I've got. Pretty much everything else is in the clear. The only other thing that I've ever really wanted for Dusty Desert is something I pitched pretty much just after Demo 1 went out. Something I don't really want to critique since at the time Chaos stated it was an impossibility for PR6, at least to his game developing knowledge back then. But all it really was to have Dusty Desert be a timed stage. I briefly mentioned something like this for Radical Train, but what I had in mind for Dusty Desert would have been very different. It's basically, what if the quicksand didn't just affect Sonic, but also the terrain? So it wouldn't just be a rush to get away from the robots, but also the area. Would be nice if this eventually goes somewhere, but I'm not expecting a thing at this point. So, yeah, moving on. Sonic White Acropolis. Love that the first jump ramp actually works now, and love that there's some dash panels at the end of the final jump ramp. I don't know why I was expecting Sonic to land on dash panels, but this works just as well. It's bonus that we actually see Sonic entering the base now. Perhaps Section 2 could start looking something like this in the future. There's even a jump ramp when the door opens if you take that shortcut, which I don't know, to me anyway, just seems so natural. Possibly because Blaze has jump panels at the start of her section. I'm just wondering if there should be a jump ramp when you branch to the left. Something I suggested in beta testing was for Sonic to kind of look back as the snowball's coming down when Sonic says,
Now that's a big snowball.
I don't know, I guess it just kind of bugged me that he says it but he didn't even look at it. But yeah, now we have a bit of an animation which really completes it, so yeah, cheers. So something I glossed over in the previous review is how Knuckles follows you in Aquatic Base but doesn't in White Acropolis. Yeah, actually, why isn't Knuckles following Sonic? At this point, the previous cutscene brought Knuckles onto the team, and while you don't switch to him in gameplay, he is in the following cutscene, so in my opinion he should at least be there following you. Something that I will point out that I'm a bit unsure about, I didn't point it out in the last review, and I do still feel regrets for not putting it out there in case it maybe actually is possible. But inverted controls. White Acropolis is the best example I can think of. Would be nice to have if it can be implemented. One thing I didn't realize until after the last review went out was in regards to why the PO6 screenshots trying to recreate the loading screens weren't used, especially when it had been done. I realized soon after the review went out that the White Acropolis loading screen actually takes place within the boss arena, an area that at the time of this video currently hasn't been implemented to PO6. Yeah, very interesting that they actually chose to do a boss area for a stage loading screen. It's almost like if they used the Exerberus area for the Dusty Desert loading screen. I wonder if that's suggesting that the arena was actually a part of the scrapped Section 3 of White Acropolis. Yeah, guess we'll never know. Sonic Crisis City. If you compare Shadow's Crisis City in PO6 to Shadow's Crisis City in the original, there is a camera change that's semi-unused, which is now used in PO6. And I briefly mentioned in the last review how Sonic's Crisis City also had a semi-unused camera in the original. Knowing that Shadow's semi-unused camera is now used in PO6, there's even more reason to put in Sonic's now. I really feel that Sonic's should make a return one day. I mean, just look how this could work. I understand the main reason this was taken out was to remove any inverted controls when you're playing, but that's just it. If this were used for just the grinding, and the camera goes back to normal when the grinding ends, problem solved. Another something that I mentioned from the previous review might be the idea to have the tornado explode, to have a fancy visual at the end of the stage, to add a bit more merit and reasoning to why Sonic would even pose, compared to before posing in front of a fiery tornado that he was literally running away from. And it's good to see the pipes kind of come towards Sonic as the tornado explodes. I don't know why I was expecting them as obstacles, but I'll take a fancy visual any day. Similarly to White Acropolis, where Sonic would look at the snowball, it's cool to see that Sonic looks and acknowledges the fiery tornado. This is what I'm talking about. These kinds of details really just make the difference, despite how minor they may seem. Oh, also, the obstacles I mentioned in the review, where if you hold down or spam, could lead to breaking out of it, or occasional deaths, all of which has now been fixed. So yeah, thank you. Oh, fucking god. The grind leaning. The idea of animating a leaning to the left animation and animating a leaning to the right animation for one character, now do this 8 more times, based off of a difference in opinion, when you could just make do with what already has been, can be considered quite absurd. And in a lot of ways I do agree with that, and because of which I was not expecting a thing. So the fact that Chaos found a way to take Sonic's leaning left and right animation and basically tell the rig to apply to all the other characters, saving himself the hassle of animating it by hand, not to mention considering the idea of changing a formula only for the sake of being faithful to what the original didn't accomplish, is beyond words. I've said this in the past and I'll say it again. If there somehow were people out there that didn't truly get a good grasp of how dedicated Chaos is to fixing 06, I think people now get a good grasp of how dedicated this guy is. Sonic Flame Core. Yeah, this lava sink is not really growing on me, to be honest. Regardless if it's RNG or not. It just feels a bit unpolished when I go to jump and I don't jump. Especially if I do it more than twice, which, you know, I do need to do to jump. More than thrice, in fact. Yeah, I don't know, it just seems to make it feel janky and unpolished. I get why it was done, but that doesn't mean that I agree with it. Not exactly sure if anything can really be done about it, without seeming too easy, or for that matter if anything should be done about it. I recently replayed a game from my childhood, going back even older than 06. THQ's The Incredibles, the video game. What caught my eye on this free playthrough was the way they programmed how you would interact with the lava. It reminded me a little bit of Super Mario Galaxy, but it really intrigued me how it would actually push the player back onto the platform, really giving you a warning that you, well, shouldn't touch it. I'm not going to suggest this, but I am curious what you guys watching think of it. Speaking of The Incredibles, a detail from this video game I pitched to BNPR6 is now a part of the project, and don't worry, I'll save that reveal for when it appears. Flamecore meteors do have a drop shadow, and a bit of a light right as they're about to collide with the ground. But with the current camera and lighting, it'd be great if the light from the fiery rocks could hit the ground a bit earlier, potentially lighting the drop shadow itself. Detailing this I feel could prepare the player a bit better. I also want to throw out this idea, where in the same way that the light cores and chaos drives can actually replenish the gauge, what if for just the crystallized rooms, for either Sonic or Shatter, the gauge begins to slowly recharge when the gauge is idle? And I do want to reiterate when I say idle, because, and big thanks for doing this, Sonic's gauge now does replenish at the speed it should. Shatter's was never meant to refill, at least based on the builds that we know of. So for Shatter, the action gauge meter could replenish, perhaps at the speed that Sonic's gauge replenished in the previous release. Meanwhile, Sonic's already replenishing fast. With the stored speed of the gauge replenishing in these crystallized rooms, it could potentially replenish even faster. And if you've used a gem or two, when the gauge is idle for a second or two, like Shatter's, it would replenish a lot slower until that second or 2 second delay expires. But again, this would only affect the gauge types for these crystallized rooms. Yeah, I feel like in the same way Chaos Drives and Light Cores are this fancy looking crystal that stores energy to the gauge, and knowing that these crystallized rooms somewhat resemble the Hidden Palace from Sonic 3 and Knuckles, also in a volcanic area? I don't know, I just like the idea of the energy of the room powering the characters, enhancing their replenishment. I did actually try to explain this in beta testing, but I've never really been too good at explaining stuff through messages. Hopefully explaining this through commentary, as well as showing through video how this could potentially work and look, can shed a bit of light on this concept. So something I'm a little confused about with the original, during the parts where they were supposed to say,
Whoa! The flame died! Dang! Out of time! I guess this flame dies after a while.
I'm a bit confused if the room really was supposed to get to the equivalent of being pitch black, or if it was actually intended to be the way it is. Because yeah, it does get dark. And currently in PR6 it also gets dark. But I don't know, I feel that with the lights that are also supposed to show you the way and light the area around, it just seemed a bit pointless because you can kind of already see where you're meant to go, even in the original. So I am curious to know what you guys think about having these sections being just pitch black, the equivalent of Fumbling in the Dark from Crash 1. And yeah, lighting the orbs would be the equivalent of getting Aku Aku to light the room, or in PR6's case, light it up to the equivalent of what it is right now. So this is kind of a similar case to White Acropolis, and it is just a nitpick, but I feel Knuckles could be following Sonic after switching back to him, kinda like an aquatic base. This way, we stay consistent, and this way it's not like we left Knuckles in the last room. Also, speaking of Section 2, I respect the idea and decisioning to try to make the top of Section 2 look like you are actually inside the volcano, especially since it was one of the other visual critiques I had with Section 2 of Flamecore in the original. I just hope that we do get an update in the future that makes it a bit more believable, I guess. Because it's not bad, it's just, it could be better. I even think borderline it could even be smaller, because in the original, the whole intent was to make it really kind of fade into darkness, to give the impression that you really fell from quite a high height, as unbelievable as 06 logic already is. Who knows, maybe we could even see the meteors shooting up from the lava, all the way to the top of the volcano, for continuity in Section 1. But on a positive note, I really do like the heat waves that are rising to the top of the volcano. An unexpected but welcome change. Before I move on, let's talk about lights. The Northern Lights. You know, it's funny. To me, and to virtually every other player, they are the Northern Lights. And it was for this reason that I asked a while back, is this supposed to be like, ooh, it's White Acropolis, bad future? Perhaps explaining why these lights are present. But no, it's just a pretty visual. There have been attempts to suggest otherwise, but yeah, I'll let you guys decide if these are Northern Lights or if they're not Northern Lights. Yeah, I know that this release specifically is just going at it with the visuals, and that's that. But I guess all I'll say in regards to this is I hope that we do eventually have the option to switch between, be it the original or this or any other potential changes in the future. Be it for variety or for just a choice to choose between which encore twist we might want to load into. Anyway, Yakuza Sonic Radical Train. Wait, remind me, what makes the trains so radical? Is it the trains that have been rigged to basically hit the bombs? Or is it the egg train that we don't even meet up with until the second section? I don't get it. Okay, so low-key, I feel there could be a mini cutscene of some sort of indication that we have finally saved the pedestrian train and now are going after the egg train. Maybe there could be a visual explanation to why Tails and Knuckles were in the previous in-game cutscenes, but have disappeared during Radical Train and in the in-game cutscene after Radical Train. So I guess aside from all the critiques that I pointed out in the last review, in Section 1, the main things I want to talk about are in Section 2. First of all, thank you so much for updating these jump panels. I can't apologize enough for the inconvenience that the transition of these jump panels went through. They went through quite the evolution, and I feel really bad that I just don't know how to explain stuff well in messages, because it went from going to the middle pillar, to the right pillar, then to the left and right pillar. Meanwhile, the second jump panel on the right sent you to the mountain the far right jump panel already sends you to, and it was like, so close! But eventually, finally, we got all three. And again, I do apologize for the inconvenience. Let's talk about the cargo that I mentioned in the last review. I feel it is important to point this out, but when pitching something, Chaos tends to get a second opinion on whatever it is being pitched. And fair enough, since he hasn't played the original. When I pitched implementing the cargo, when getting a second opinion on this idea, the people that were disagreeing with this idea were imagining if this were implemented to the original or the retail version. And as an obstacle, how this would behave in the original is if you hit it, it would phase right through, which could potentially lead to a death. The funky thing about Pier 6 is that, it has new states, such as bouncing back. So, if this were implemented, there would be no risk to dying, simply because you would bounce back. So yeah, since there's no real reason to not have it, will be good to eventually see it in the future. So okay, as Sonic starts chasing the train, we see cargo blowing up. But later on, we find out the reason why this is because Shadow's the one doing the damage. So I'm not really sure how much could be done. I don't know if it'd be possible to visually have Shadow always in front of Sonic blasting the train, but in case it is, just throwing out this idea. I just feel some kind of a visual to why the train is exploding could be potentially enhanced instead of it just, Before I move on, I know this will probably not get done, but I'm hoping in either Pier 6 or any other project that we see some kind of an extended ending for Radical Train where you end up going into the tunnel with the train. There's some kind of a visual to explain Sonic getting Elise. Perhaps some other visual to also hint that Shadow is nearby and he's gonna, have his talk with Eggman like he does in the cutscene. But more importantly, Sonic getting Elise, then continuing to run through the tunnel and, exiting the tunnel, entering the eventual Shadow vs. Silver boss battle area. This could be something as basic as just having the results screen show Sonic with Elise instead of just Sonic, to something as big as Sonic actually having a visual getting Elise from the train and running into the tunnel. But yeah, ultimately to set up that transition to those cutscenes. Aside from that, yeah, that's pretty much all I've got. Let's move on. Sonic Tropical Jungle. So, since Demo 3's review, it has been made clear to me as to why the orange or fire-like shield has been implemented over the green shield. And yeah, it's a shame, because I do understand it. But yeah, I think I'm always going to prefer the concept of the green shield. Also, with these promotional screenshots or review build screenshots, at this point I'm just leaving it here for Chaos to decide if he wants to implement it. Same with this clip. So again, this is yet another stage that has some visual changes to it, which again kind of adds to what I said in Flame Core. If this is going to affect future releases, I think it would be wise to in the future have an option or a selection as you select the stage, giving you the decision on which setting or in-core version you would like to load into. Almost like selecting which weather you want to load into. Also, I just noticed that the gauge replenishment delay isn't affecting if you jump and land, meaning as soon as you land, instead of playing the 0.5 second delay, it instead immediately recharges, implying that maybe the delay played during the jump.
Something might happen if I knock down that fruit.
So I feel that this line could be swapped out for
Jump!
then immediately after
Something might happen if I knock down that fruit.
could start playing. It's minor, but it would be a small enhancement. But aside from all that, can I just ask, is it me? Or do I always just seem to really struggle getting the S rank for this stage? Of all the stages, this one specifically. I don't know if it's just me, but yeah, I've always struggled. Let's move on.